So Miller come over to me, and he says, now, you know, he says, what we want you to do, he says, we want you in one of those two towns in 45 minutes or less, that's what we call you, and we want you to pick up 2 men. And he says, we want you to drive them south out of there. We don't know now where we're going to put them at, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And I found out that was Highway 77 south of out of Dallas, Fort Worth. And he says, what kind of area do you know down there? And I said, what part? And he said, to put a gravesite. And he said, we want it really barren, where these graves not going to be found ever, where nobody ever come in there and do any digging or moving or anything. I said, yeah, I know a place. He said, I know a place exactly. And so he says, I want you to sit down. I want you to draw me a map of it. Okay. It hadn't been that many years since I've been there. So they started going over this and looking at it. And he put it on a map, the Texas map. They had a fine print map. I don't know where they got it at. But it had a lot of little rivers in it and streams. And this place showed up real easy on their map. So I showed him, I said, that'd be a good place to bury somebody if you didn't want them found. And he said, okay. He says, we'll go with that. And I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, well, it'll be another burial site. But he says, we'll take care of that. We already got it planned. And we already got a place for it. So evidently, they had somebody around that area that could dig these 2 graves. And I said, well, who's going to dig these graves? I want to know they're there before I go in there with dead bodies. And I said, I got to know they're there. And they said, they'll be there. We got Mexicans going to dig it. And he said, they're going to have supervision over it. Well, this is right next door to the Johnson Ranch, his back door to his ranch. And so I kind of thought then, you know, something was wrong here. But I never put anything together, you know. And so they come up, they showed me the second grave. Very, very easy to pick. They said, you know where this is? I said, well, I don't know where it's at, but I said, I can find it, but the landmark's there. I said, no problem, I will walk right to it. And so then he started asking me, what's the hotel number? And I tell him. And he kept doing this all the way through the conversation, about every hour. He said, what's the hotel number? And then he gave me another number, and he said, I don't want this number. He said, I know that you're going to have to write it down for a while. But he says, I want you to memorize it and put it somewhere in your car that you can get to. And that's the number that you'll be calling us on to keep in touch. I said, okay. Now, we sat there for probably best part of 4 hours, going over maps, going over room numbers, going over everything, even stop signs, how many it was that I'd have to come out of Dallas on, and which would be the fewest. So then he says, what you're going to do, he says, you're going to pick up 2 men, either outside of Waco, at this certain spot, and that was, he marked it, at the stockyards. He said, that's where the 2 men will be waiting on you. And he said, you'll have to swing around, head south out there, and head for Blanco, and then for New Braunfels. But he said, now, if something else comes wrong, that this is not going to be done in Fort Worth, he says, it will be done in Dallas, because we got people there. They got backup for everything. And I stopped a minute, and then I happened to think of Mickey Cohen. I says, Mickey's not in any part of this, is he? Because You know, they knew I was the enemy of Mickey. He said, no, you won't have nothing to do with Mickey. He says, Mickey will do his own thing. That's what he said. He says, Mickey will do his own thing. And he's got a couple of people down there that's working with him. He says, you don't have to worry about Mickey. I says, well, I don't want no part of Mickey. I said, he'll get you killed. And Millie, he says, you're right. And so, anyway, we go back over the whole down, talking again, and me drawing the map again, even taking the one away that I draw from, make me draw another one. And then an hour later, make me draw another one. And they was covering everything pretty good. And I kept looking at these two guys, and one of them, the taller one, went down to get some food at the little, I don't know, little hot dog place or whatever it was. And he brought some food up and booze up about 9:30 or 10. And I couldn't eat. I was kind of upset looking at all this mess that I might be headed for. And then they finally come to it and said, now, what would be your direct, you know, to get to Waco within 8 to 12 hours? And they said, we want you somewhere in the Middle West. We don't want you around there because we don't want no tracking back of you in any way. And so when we tell you it's ready, you leave where you're going to be at and you go right to Waco. And don't stop until you get there. And don't take nobody with you. You do it all by yourself. And so I agreed on that. And so he kept talking about, well, where do you want to set low for the 2.5 weeks? And I said, well, how about middle of South Dakota or North Dakota? I said, it doesn't make any difference. I says, if I'm in line with Waco, all I got to do is about 700 to 800 miles, and I can make that in a day and a night. I'll be there the next morning. He says, okay, you need to be there at a certain time. And he said, we want you at least to have 5 to 8 hours to rest and get ready for this. I said, I can do that. And so everybody started drinking whiskey, and the little guy with the horn-rimmed glasses, he was always never look at me, and he'd never make eye contact with me. He'd always look away, and he took a couple of shots of whiskey. And the tall guy, he would make eye contact with me all the time. And so I was trying to remember their faces, if I ever met them before. And they was wearing what they call Oklahoma brim hat. It was short brim, and a lot of Texans wore those. And the one had one on, and he took it off and laid it on the table in there. And I've drawn pictures of this room where everything was. And the little guy kept me, something about him I didn't trust. He was nervous, or I don't know what it was. I just never trusted him. So after the meeting was about over with, after they kept going over these things and over, I said, well, let's get back to one other thing. I said, how about Mickey? I said, he's not going to be one of the people I pick up, or is he? And he said, no. He says, not Mickey. But he says, Mickey will be in the area. That's all he said. Plus 2 other people that we got complete control of. And I said, okay, I just want to be sure that it wasn't Mickey. And then I said, well, what do you want me to do with the 2 shooters?